One of the greatest obstacles to crafting health and wellness is identifying and controlling inflammation. It's at the core of all complex and chronic diseases, and it's the driving mechanism that underlies the most common symptoms that people like you struggle to overcome. Join us as we explore cutting-edge science and research to give you the information and tools you need to create the quality of life you want and deserve. And now, here is the host of Inflammation Nation, Dr. Stephen Noseworthy.
Hey guys, welcome back to Inflammation Nation. We're going to talk about some of the principles that underline this idea of autonomous health. And I know that we've been on that topic for quite a while now, but it is, in essence, call it my holy cause. My main mission is to help share thoughts and ideas and information with people so that they can take better care of themselves. So let's, for the sake of discussion today, let's assume that whoever's listening doesn't have any major medical problems that really truly needs conventional medical attention. Let's just kind of start with that. Obviously, if you need medical attention, you need medical attention. And so anything that I say is nice to hear, nice to know, nice to learn, but it may not be the most important thing for you to do right now. So again, let's make that assumption. I'm going to do this somewhat rapid fire. I'm not going to dwell too long on any one of these principles that I'm going to go through. And I've got, probably a dozen or so that I want to hit in our conversation today. So each one is going to be relatively short. Some of these things you may have already heard if you've been listening to the podcast over the last couple of months. And so it'll be a reminder. It's not going to be, like a detailed treatise of that particular thing. So the first thing I want to start with is this concept of autonomous health is that, you are unique, and all of the doctors that you might be working with should be treating you that way. And I would encourage you to perhaps think twice about working with any practitioner with any credential behind their name, whether that's like me, a chiropractor, or a medical doctor, a naturopath, or a doctor of Oriental medicine. Think twice about working with someone who does the same thing the same way, in the same order with everyone that they work with. That's a sure sign that you have somebody who either has very low information and understanding of functional medicine, or they've chosen to do that intentionally because it just simply allows them to see more people. That's just the bottom line. So you are unique, and your doctor should be treating you that way. The second concept and principle of autonomous health is that your body is an intelligently designed, self-regulating, and self-healing organism. Now, there are certainly limitations to that because we're made of human matter. We're made of matter, and matter itself has limitations. But in many cases, because the body is so wonderfully designed, in many cases, all you have to do is remove a few obstacles, and your body's going to do what it's designed to do. Now, that is more likely to happen if the problems and obstacles that you're facing are fundamental, if they're kind of basic or simple, or if you only have one or two. The more complicated your situation is, the longer that you've had it, the more things that are involved in that, and the longer your body has existed in some state of dysregulation, the longer it's going to take and the more effort it will take to get your body out of that and get it back to the way it was designed to operate, or as close to that as we can possibly get. The next idea is to remember that your body is an integrated system of integrated systems. It functions as a whole, but it is made up with interlinked and interdependent parts. And I will remind you of, I think it was one of the first, perhaps the second podcast episode I did over a year ago, where I talked about Professor Tada and his concept of the neuroendocrine immune supersystem. And if you missed that episode, go back and listen to it. I think it really captures a lot of the big ideas in how human function operates. But basically, very quickly, for those of you who may not have heard it at this point, the neuroendocrine immune supersystem basically it's a recognition of how your brain, your hormones, and your immune system all work together to create optimal function. And so even though we might have discussions or focus for a period of time on the brain specifically. We can't really have a sensible conversation about the brain without talking about your hormones and your immune system for this reason. Your brain makes hormones. Your brain responds to hormones made by other organ systems, like your reproductive hormones. Your brain also responds to the activity of certain immune chemicals, and your brain exerts influence over your immune system. So no matter how you twist that around, your brain, your hormones, and your immune system are really just different facets of the same thing. Now, when we get beyond that and we look at things like major symptom, or sorry, systems, not symptoms, major systems like your gut, it's not specifically neurological, it's not specifically hormonal or immunological. In fact, it is an amalgamation of all of these things. So your gut, for example, holds more nervous system tissue in it than in your brain. Your gut makes hormones. It also responds to hormones, but your gut also makes immune chemicals. And so in this system, this super system of systems, we have other systems that reflect aspects of each of the super systems, if that makes sense, and I didn't lose you. And, with respect to the gut specifically, I think by its very design and how it functions, this is one of several reasons why many have said for centuries, if not longer, that health begins in the gut. All right, moving on to another principle. Your body uses various inputs to modify its outputs. In fact, I did an episode on this just a week or so ago where I said change your input to change your outputs. And the whole concept of that, and again, this is an underlying principle of autonomous health. If you want to be in charge of your health and do the most that you can, you have to understand that the major levers that you can pull to impact your genetic expression and ultimately your health are your diet and your lifestyle, and those are choices that you make every day, as well as how you interact with the environment. These are the things that play the most important roles in whatever health or illness or wellness or unwellness that you experience. Another principle is to operate under what I call the 80-20 rule. And if you've heard of something called the Pareto principle, this is something came out of business management research. You may have heard it before, but and I'm going to apply this in two different ways. I call it the 80-20 rule. But basically, as I've said recently, 80% of what can help you is under your control. You may not need expert guidance to make progress. You just, maybe start working on your diet and lifestyle choices and think about environmental exposures to things like household chemicals or personal care products that you're putting on your body and how that might be impacting your toxin load. You can make these simple changes that can have a profound impact on your health and wellness. So that's one way we can apply the 80-20 rule, right? 80% of what's going to help you is under your control. Or we can flip that around and say 20% of the things that you could do are going to give you 80% of your results. Listen, there's a ton of different strategies that you can employ. Whether it's a diet change or a lifestyle change or supplementation, doesn't really matter. There's a bunch of things that you could do. But what I don't want you to do is I don't want you to think you have to do it all, especially if you are spending a lot of time on YouTube or listening to podcasts, whether it's mine or somebody else's. Doesn't really matter. There's so much information. It's so easy to get to the point where you're at information overload. And sometimes people contact me and they're like, I just don't know what to do. Like, I'm frozen. There are so many things that I've learned and I've heard about. I can't possibly do them all. And my answer to them is like, you're right. You can't. You'll drive yourself bananas. It's not even an effective strategy. Right? You don't need to fix everything at once. You probably can't anyways. And you certainly don't have to do all the things that all the experts are talking about, whether that is YouTube videos, podcasts, social media, or books that you're reading. Don't think that you should or could do everything. The key is to pick the most fundamental problems and start working on those first. Do things that are the easiest, the most obvious. And, sometimes we call it picking the low-hanging fruit, the things that you have easy access to that maybe don't cost you much time or effort to make a change in. You can overwhelm yourself very easily. Like, all you have to do, just, kind of like think about all the things that's changed in what the experts are saying how to do things like intermittent fasting. Like, it used to be that intermittent fasting was one thing. You wake up in the morning, you wait till about 11 o'clock to eat, and then you eat from 11 to 7, right? You called it the 7-11 strategy or 11-7 strategy. But gosh, now there's like 800 different types of intermittent fasting. And every video that you hear, you're almost thinking like, well, now I've got to do it that way. I used to do it the other way, but now I've got to do it this way because that's what the experts are saying. And that's not true, even though it might be presented that way, that if you're not doing it like this, then you're going to be missing out. Don't put that pressure on yourself. Next principle is to know your story and to know your why. You know, I've said in the past that your symptoms are important, but what's more important is to understand how your symptoms are affecting you, particularly with the quality of life that you want. In other words, what have you stopped doing or modified because you just don't feel well anymore? And make sure that you're focusing on creating wellness rather than just avoiding symptoms or avoiding a disease. In fact, I think that was the topic of the last episode we just did, was making sure that you're working towards something rather than trying to avoid something. And that's a major shift in your motivation status that will keep you pursuing optimal wellness until you accomplish as much as you can, rather than, you know, stopping short and robbing yourself of an opportunity to continue to work better. And if you missed that, just go back, I think, one episode and pick that one up. Another thing to do, another principle to think about, is to write down your health timeline. And I recommend you do that decade by decade so that you can see the big picture and you can see how your health flows or changes over time. Remember that your health history is a story. It's your story that will reveal key insights that you can't see if all you're doing is describing to someone what your symptoms are today. You know, it might be that a lot of the things that you're experiencing today and have experienced over the last couple of years have their roots or their origin in something that happened 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. This is not uncommon. And you can't connect those dots unless you step back and try to see the big picture. And who better to construct that big picture than you yourself? So take a sheet of paper or, you know, open a word processor and just write down decade by decade, like from age 0 to 10, this is what happened to me with my health. Age 11 to 20, 21 to 30, and just keep going up until whatever your age is, and fill in as much detail as you can. Keep the bullet points so it's not like paragraphs and paragraphs reading like a short story, so to speak. Keep it in bullet points so it's easy for you to go back and digest, and easier for someone perhaps like me to see that and go, okay, I can see the big picture, and I can see we went from this, we went from that, and then this happened, and these two were linked together, and that's why we are where we are today. It's very, very, very helpful. Another thing to focus on is to figure out your patterns and pivot points. Again, I've talked about this over the last couple of months. Patterns are things. Think of recurrent themes in your life. Some people will say to me, for example, like, I've always struggled with my gut, or ever since I can remember, I've had this, or I've been this way, fill in the blank, whether it's struggling with sleep or hormones or anxiety or blood sugar control or food cravings or headaches. It doesn't really matter. Look for a pattern, because patterns and pivot points, which I'll explain here in a second, in these lie the clues to your metabolic glitches, as I call them, and where to focus your learning and your self-care efforts. For example, if you go through your health history and think about your patterns, I've always struggled with fill in the blank, or I've struggled with fill in the blank for a very long time, and that's a pattern that you see over and over again, then maybe you need to go do a course on that. You know, maybe you find that it's your gut, then, you know, do my 5-step gut learning course. Or maybe it's, I've got this really long history of chemical sensitivity, and I've had to change all my personal care products and my household cleaners. And I got to be careful of soaps and shampoos or whatever the case might be. Then maybe you want to do my 3D detox course and learn more about why these things happen, what do we know now scientifically about how all these problems can affect you, but also to give you strategies of things that you can do on your own. That's the whole point of the learning courses that I've created that are on my website, is so that you can go and learn at your own pace at a very low cost. All right. So think about your patterns. Now, what are pivot points? Pivot points are, say, periods of time or events where your health has changed for the better or for the worse. So, for example, if somebody says, hey, when I went gluten-free and went low carb, I felt so much better. Well, that's a positive pivot point because that change gave you something good. A negative pivot point would be where something happens and you feel worse. Like, for example, I got fired from my job, or one of my kids got really sick, or maybe I'm struggling in my relationship, or maybe I traveled to another country and I got a parasite. And from that point forward, everything got worse, or it got worse for a period of time. Those would be negative pivot points. And listen, when you combine your health history, well, let me back up. When you combine your story and a very clear picture of who you want to be and what optimal health looks like for you, and you go back and you look at your story, your history, and you see the flow of things over time, and then you understand your patterns and your pivot points, you will be so much further ahead in understanding what your next step is than if you just sat around going like, I wonder why I'm so sick, or why do I struggle with this over and over and over again? Little bit of time, a little bit of thinking can really bring a lot of clarity. The next principle is to make sure that you have a plan. Random choices have very, very low probability of working. Sometimes people will contact me and they'll say, what do you think of this supplement? My next question is, for what? What are you trying to fix? In fact, this happened to me today. I had somebody text me like, what about these supplements? And there was I had no frame of reference. I mean, all the supplements that were listed looked great. They sound great for specific reasons. But if you are on supplements right now, if you have chosen to take a bunch of supplements because you read a blog article or social media post, podcast, YouTube video, and something sounded important and something sounded like a good idea, and you just bought it because you thought it was a good idea, the likelihood of that actually matching your underlying root cause in your metabolic challenges is pretty low. Very low, I would say. In fact, I had somebody else contact me recently who wanted my opinion on a protocol for, they were struggling with neuropathy, basically numbness and tingling and burning sensations in extremities. And they had come across some group on the internet that sold a bunch of supplements for neuropathy, as well as some, kind of like therapeutic tools. And this guy got some relief, and that's wonderful, but he stopped taking the supplements, and some things got better, other things got worse. And my question again, which is typically my question when someone says, what do you think about this? My question is, well, what are you trying to accomplish? What's the problem? And so, it was a circumstance where this gentleman had, in trying to help himself, and kudos for that, didn't have context or frame of reference because he didn't know what the cause of the neuropathy was. And in any general circumstance, if someone works with a healthcare practitioner, you want to know what the root cause is, because someone might put together a neuropathy protocol, or a protocol for anything. It doesn't matter. Neuropathy is just the example. And if it's just based on a clinical diagnosis, or if it's based on a set of symptoms, again, there's a small percentage chance that it's going to hit the right spot for that person and it's going to work wonders. But the probability is, because there's more than one cause for things like neuropathy, the probability is stacked against you or anybody else, the fact that you're just going to randomly hit on something that's going to work. Because at the end of the day, the outfit that sold this gentleman supplements in therapeutic units did no diagnostics. He filled out a questionnaire and was basically shipped a bunch of stuff that cost him money, and some of which helped, which is wonderful, some of which didn't. Why? Because there was no diagnostic process. There was no understanding of root cause. So random choices are probably not going to work. The same is true of shotgun approaches. Like, you might have some rational reasons for taking certain things. Like, maybe it's a good idea for everyone to take some high quality fish oil. And, there's so many wonderful things out there floating around about anti-inflammatory compounds like turmeric or resveratrol or any number of other compounds. Yeah, you take that stuff and you would think, well, this is probably going to do something good for you on some level. But then all of a sudden, if you're out there and you're kind of gobbling, no pun intended, but you're gobbling up all these different supplements, and your list keeps growing because you keep reading about more wonderful things. And every couple of years, there's this new superfood from the Amazon that you feel like if you're not doing it, if you're not taking it, then you're just not doing your body the service that it deserves. And all of a sudden, you're taking 15 or 20 things, and you're still not better. You're just trying to do too much. You're just like throwing everything against your physiology and hoping something is going to work or something is going to stick. So random choices aren't really going to work. Shotgun approaches really don't work either. You have to have a plan, which means that you have to have some kind of strategic understanding of what it is you're dealing with and what you're trying to change. Now, I get it that if you're not a clinician and you don't have access to proper diagnostic testing, at some point everything becomes a guess. I totally understand that. Yet I still encourage people to do as much as they can. But for the most part, when I say, like, listen, you got to do what you can to help yourself, I'm not talking about going out and taking a bunch of supplements, because more than likely you're not going to pick the right stuff. I am talking about making better choices with your diet, with your lifestyle, and cleaning up your exposure to environmental toxins. That's the low-hanging fruit. In fact, I've said this before, you can't out-supplement a bad diet, for example. So before you get into supplementation, even just beyond anything that's basic, like enzymes, fish oil, or antioxidants like glutathione, if you're going to go beyond that, just work on your diet and your lifestyle first if you haven't already. You also have to pick something and stick with it long enough to figure out if it's helping before you draw any conclusions. And actually, let me hold that thought, because I want to say one more thing before I get to that thought, and I will come back to that. Another principle is, if you're going to get into some kind of self-care or work with someone, for example, like me, you have to ask yourself, what are you not willing to change, and why is that so? I will tell you that if you ever reach out to me and say, hey, doc, I would love to work with you in your one-on-one coaching, what's it going to take? My first thing is going to be like, what are you willing to change? What are you willing to do? What are you willing to not do? If you're not exercising, you're going to have to exercise. If you're not eating the right way, you're going to have to change your diet. If you haven't cleaned up or done as much as you can in terms of reducing your exposure to toxic chemicals, you're going to have to do that. These are fundamentals. If we skip those, we're really not helping in the ways that we should. And so is there something that you're not willing to do? And why is that the case? I have told this story before on the podcast. Gentleman many years ago, early 30s-ish, was gluten-free, and after our investigation I came to the wasn't gluten-free. But in working up his case, I came to the conclusion that his particular immune response to gluten was a root cause that needed to be dealt with. He refused to go gluten-free, and his rationale was because he was Italian, and Italians eat bread. That was his rationale. So what are you willing to change? What are you not willing to change? And you have to be honest with yourself. Are you going to limit your potential for improvement in any way? If I said to you, if we were in a one-on-one coaching relationship and I said to you, listen, Joe or Mary, or whatever your name is, you have got to get to the gym. You've got to get outside. You need to start walking. You need to start doing this or that. And if you're like, well, I just don't like to do those things, and you choose not to, I hate to be harsh, but that's on you. You have to be willing to do the things that are going to help you. And if you're not, then you have to accept the consequences of that. And no, there's no pill or supplement or even drug that's going to compensate for what exercise can do for you. Listen, if we could bottle exercise and give you a pill and you get the same benefit, don't you think we would have done that by now? Same thing with lifestyle changes or diet changes. How bad do you really want to be better? How bad do you want it? The final thing in terms of principles that I want to cover today is that if you choose to do natural approaches, again, we call it functional medicine. These things take time to change your physiology. They're not quick. Now, there are people who might change their diet and within days feel radically better. But you're not going to go to the gym, for example, or change your sleep time and immediately reap the rewards. It's very infrequent, although it does happen, for someone to take a supplement and within hours feel better. Here's the deal. Natural medicine is not like pharmacy. It's just not. In most cases, natural medicine supports normal function, but it doesn't dominate it like medications do. This is one of the reasons why medications can have such a rapid effect. You have a headache, you take ibuprofen, your headache goes away in most cases. But it's because they're so powerful. But natural medicine is not, because it's not pharmacy. And again, some diet and lifestyle modifications, they need to be practiced consistently over time before you start to see any improvements and before those improvements become, let's say, entrenched in your body. Some supplements might take weeks or even months to have maximum effect. And that's probably rooted in the fact that, natural compounds have relatively short half-lives. If you swallow an herbal supplement, that's going to affect your physiology maybe for half a day, somewhere around there. But then it's going to disappear. The impact will disappear, which is, why quite often, if you're doing natural medicine, you have to take herbal supplements or vitamins and minerals 2, sometimes 3 times a day over a period of time for you to start to notice a difference. So you can't have the same expectations of natural medicine that you might have of things that live in the world of conventional medicine, like drugs and medication. Let me just start to wind this down. Listen, some people don't need much help or guidance, and I hope you're one of them. I hope there's something simple that I've said or you've learned, whether it's from me or somewhere else, that really makes a huge difference in your life. So some people don't need much help or guidance. Many people do. Your job is to figure out where you are and to make the right choice. Do I pursue self-learning and kind of upgrade my own education so I can make better decisions, so I'm not just making random choices or, adopting this shotgun approach? But there is a shortcut, right? The shortcut is to work with someone who is an expert. If you would like to apply for a spot in my one-on-one coaching programs, then you can contact me through the website. Just go to www.drnoseworthy.com. That's drnoseworthy.com. There's a contact form there that you can fill out, answer a couple of questions, and then send it. It comes to me directly. I usually am able to respond to that certainly within half a day. I'll get back to you, and then we can figure out what your proper next steps are. I'd be honored and thrilled to hear from you. All right, that's a wrap. The next episode, we are going to talk about a functional hierarchy so that you can understand which problems are most important to fix before you try to fix other things. Like I said, you can't fix everything at one time. So you have to have some kind of strategic approach that lets you know this problem is worse than that problem, or it's more fundamental, so I have to deal with that first. All right, again, if you want more information, just check me out at drnoseworthy.com. We're all over social media. Please remember to comment, rate, like, and follow. It helps others find the information that they need, and honestly, it just makes me feel good. All right, guys, I'll see you in the next episode.